Welcome to the Ray Hanania Show, brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News, the leading English-language newspaper in the Middle East, at arabnews.com. I'm Ray Hanania, your host. This week here at the Ray Hanania Show, we address the growing conflict in the Middle East that has expanded into Lebanon with Israel's assault. And we speak with two guests, longtime Lebanese American Jean Abinader, who is the Vice President for Policy at the American Task Force on Lebanon. He has decades of experience in public affairs and advocacy, international marketing, education and training, and project management in the Arab world. He regularly contributes an analysis in a weekly blog hosted by ATFL on current events in Lebanon and the region. And our second guest, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, professor of political science at California State University, Dominguez Hills in California. Dr. Salhi's academic research is in international politics and comparative politics with the Middle East and North Africa as his area of study. In this week's episode of the Ray Hanania Radio Show, we explore the extremism of the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu to embrace regional and to reject regional peace, and his inability and actually contribution to foment conflict with the Palestinians and with Lebanon. We explore the weakness of the leadership of the American government to force peaceful change and the growing influence of Israel in the U.S. through its political action committees, which donate hundreds of millions of dollars to buy the support of American members of Congress and the U.S. Senate. Our guests look at the situation as it worsens in Lebanon, although they project the belief that things could change after the U.S. elections when a president is elected and who could actually impose something to bring the conflicts to an end. The Ray Hanania Radio Show is broadcast live every Thursday at 5 p.m. on WNZK AM 690 Radio and rebroadcast on Monday at 5 p.m. in Michigan. It is also available online at arabnews.com/Ray Radio Show. Get more information on host Ray Hanania at arabnews.com or on his personal website at www.hanania.com. We will be right back right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
As the weather gets colder, it's a good idea to layer up with scarves, hats, and mittens. Another layer of protection this season is to get your flu and COVID-19 vaccines. You can get both vaccines at the same time. Talk to your healthcare provider or learn more at michigan.gov/COVID-flu-RSV and layer up for some added peace of mind. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain. Every Thursday in Michigan at 5 p.m., award-winning columnist and journalist Ray Hanania hosts the Ray Hanania Radio Show, presented by the U.S. Arab Radio Network on WNZK AM 690 Radio and brought to you by Arab News newspaper. This season's focus is on the U.S. presidential elections. Will it be Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or Dr. Jill Stein? Veteran political analysts and elected officials will join as guests. Join us every Thursday at 5 p.m. on WNZK AM 690 Radio for the Ray Hanania Radio Show, presented by the U.S. Arab Radio Network, a special on the presidential elections. Shows are rebroadcast each Monday at 5 p.m. Get to know more about the show at arabnews.com.
And now I'm really honored to be speaking with a longtime friend and analyst who really understands Lebanon, Jean Abinader. He's a senior advisor at the American Task Force on Lebanon, and he has decades of experience in public affairs and advocacy, international marketing, education, training, and project management in the Arab world. He contributes analysis for a blog occasionally hosted by the ATFL on current events in Lebanon and the region, and I'm hoping he can help us understand this terrible tragedy taking place, not just in Lebanon, but in the Middle East. John, thank you so much for joining us on the radio show.
It's good to be back, and even though we ain't going to talk about Lebanon.
Yes, yeah, I know. Lebanon is very tragic. First of all, tell me, when you look at this conflict, before we get into the details, what do you think of? I mean, what comes to mind when you see what's happening in Lebanon?
Nothing original. I mean, yes, I've been a lot around for the Civil War when Israel invaded Lebanon before. I've covered things like Civil War in Africa. It's just amazing that when you think of it, you really think, why is Lebanon? How can it exist after all this conflict?
Yeah, it's a beautiful country, Lebanon. I've been up there a couple times, and I've always just embraced it. To see this happening is just horrible. How do you explain the dynamics of what's happening? I mean, how do you explain to the average person what we're seeing? You know, someone that doesn't know the whole history of Lebanon and the Middle East, what do you tell an American about what is happening today in Lebanon on the southern border?
That's a really good question, because it gets to the heart of what we've been saying about Lebanon for 40 years. In other words, most people have in their mind the image of a country that's born between Christians and Muslims, and which is absolutely inaccurate. And now the narrative is it's the country torn between Christians and Hezbollah, or between Israel and Hezbollah. So the overriding images are incorrect to begin with. But we are fighting for the soul of Lebanon. In other words, is it going to be an outpost for an Iranian paramilitary called Hezbollah, or is it going to return to its weak roots as a quasi-democratic country?
And I know that, you know, for years, first it was Syria that kind of was the overlord, and then suddenly that changed after the Civil War and the Israeli invasion. And then Hezbollah rose up as a powerful military force. I mean, what options do the Lebanese have to end this conflict? I know Lebanese people are very peaceful. They don't want conflict. But it seems like they're shoved into conflict over and over by other players. What options do they have? What do you think needs to be done? And what can be done?
See, the Lebanese could take over Lebanon, I mean, for a year or so and see if they can get something right. But the options are very limited, because one, you have an antiquated political system that's not working. And so you don't have the will in the government to take the kinds of steps it needs to change the situation. And two, you have a state within a state. You have Hezbollah, which has a stronger military, banking system, supermarkets, all this kind of stuff, that supports people in Lebanon the way the government should, but doesn't. And so you've got a real dilemma on your hands, because if you hit Lebanon and you hit Hezbollah, you hurt the people of Lebanon. Is that what you want? You know? But the overriding narrative that the Israelis have convinced us is that Hezbollah is bad, therefore by extension the Lebanese are bad, and so we can do whatever we want to protect our northern border.
So it sounds like part of the problem is that the government is weak from over the years. And I don't mean individuals are bad leaders, but the government system isn't strong enough to really control the country. Is that the case, you think?
But it's also individuals and bad leaders. I mean, there's nothing inherently incapable of the Lebanese government system. It's the people that have been in the government taking advantage of it to take care of their families, their friends, to make their own financial wealth out of it. So they really haven't focused on building up Lebanon. And they've had a lot of opportunities. They had a civil war. They could have regrouped and created something after that. They've had the Israeli invasion of '06. I mean, it's just that there's really not a will among leadership to change the calculus of how they make decisions in Lebanon.
You think Lebanon is waiting for some strong new leader to step up to do the right thing? I mean, it sounds like you want to bring everybody together, get away from this religious, identity, like you're one thing and someone is something else. Bring the government together to control their own military, because you can't have a shadow military operating under the nose of a government that has no control over it. It's just, it's horrible. But is that what's missing? Are we missing a strong leader to help guide Lebanon?
I think that's an interesting question because it goes back to basic concept of leadership in the Arab world. Do they always want a Nasser or a Gaddafi or a whomever, Assad, in order to rise above the confessional identity that people have? I would hope by this time, we're in the 21st century, the Lebanese people would have evolved beyond patriarchal systems and look at more at what's good for the country, not for my neighbor, myself. But it doesn't happen here in the U.S. Why do we expect it to happen in Lebanon?
Yeah, no, you're right. The U.S. is in turmoil, as we both know. The politics here, it's so polarized. There's no middle ground. That sounds like the case in Lebanon. There's no middle ground. There's one powerful military, and they're just going to do whatever they want. And the government is weak. Do you think that's the situation now, that a weak government with a strong military, shadow military that's not even part of the government?
I think it's very clear that Hezbollah is taking advantage of the fact that Lebanon has a weak political system, and it's been able to develop both as a military force and a political force. The expression a lot of Lebanese use is they're caught between the mafia and the militia.
Wow.
Mafia of the old political leadership, and the militia, which has its own raison d'etre. And so Lebanon has really put itself into a trap that underscores the question of whether or not Lebanon can survive.
And I know that this has always been a question in the past. Would outside involvement from another Arab country or another country step in and help Lebanon get better? Or do you think that would be, in other words, should the Lebanese people do it themselves, or do they need help from outside to help them get this together?
Oh, way the forces do it. Push Lebanon apart. For example, Lebanon can't control Hezbollah, so there's something. Lebanon can't elect the president, cannot elect the president, so there's another area where an outside force can help. Lebanon can't have a distribution of power that works on a local level, so an outside force may help there. But ultimately, and I'm talking quick, I'm talking 10 years or so,
right?
Lebanese have to take charge of their own country. They have the smarts to do it. You know, as you said, you've met Lebanese, you work with them. You look at Lebanese outside of the world, they're in great shape. That's why I'm saying that maybe the diaspora, the expatriates, should take over Lebanon for a year or two, and we'll see if they can make qualitative change in the way the government's run. With Hezbollah there, with their agenda, which is not a Lebanese agenda, it's an Iranian agenda, very little hope that Lebanon will survive and as integrated in unit.
I know that the U.S. and a lot of the political forces in the U.S. spend a lot of time focused on the Middle East, but very little on Lebanon. Do you think that maybe they need to, the U.S. government needs to spend more time in assisting Lebanon and providing support for the government?
I'm doing that for decades with ATFL, but the issue is really how do you clear out the other impediments to U.S. interests in the region? So when we look at it, we want to fight terrorism, so we're against Hezbollah and the Syrian. We want to protect Israel, so that's another calculus. None of that helps Lebanon's integration or strengthening of the institutions. We know what has to be done. They need to elect the president, they need to clean up the parliament, they need to have a better economic system. I mean, it's not rocket science what needs to be done. But as you said, there's no motivation, there's no single political leader who says, let's do it. There are plenty of people in parliament who have ideas about how the country should be run. But as long as they're looking, like you said, the outside, either for strength or unity, they're never going to be a unified country.
So they really shouldn't, they can't look, they got to really build themselves, in other words, from within. They got to change the system. Now, Hezbollah is very powerful. It probably, in fact, if I were to look at the Middle East, they're probably the most powerful Arab force in the region, the only one that can stand up to Israel. I don't know if there's another military that's strong enough to even face off with Israel. That puts a huge challenge on the Lebanese people, doesn't it?
The pressure of retaliation is always toward Lebanese people, very little toward Hezbollah. If you look at the rocket attacks in the last 2 days, you look at the threats that Israel is making, they're always saying, okay, Lebanese civilians, get out of these areas because that's where Hezbollah has its rocket launchers, so we're going to go in and clean up the rocket launchers. Well, we just sit back and we say, yeah, terrible thing, those rocket launchers. It's de facto, we accept what's said about Hezbollah without really knowing on the ground what's there and not there. It's no question they're a malign force, but they also represent Lebanese people. So the question is, how do we get the needs of Lebanese people that Hezbollah represents met without further antagonism?
And in this formula, this situation, it does seem like it's the Lebanese people who are actually suffering the most. It's not Hezbollah, it's not the political leaders. It seems like the people are suffering, and the Israelis, I don't know, I would think that if I were an Israeli leader, I'd want to help Lebanon restore its government. But it doesn't seem like Israel's actions are even designed to do that. It just seems like they've written Lebanon off, and if they need to destroy the South and even into Beirut, they're going to do that.
That's the problem. The central problem is that Israel and Hezbollah have drawn lines in the sand, or wherever you draw these red lines. And the lines essentially say, this is ours, and we're going to dictate what happens here, and everybody else stay out of it. So they've decided a decade ago, since they left Lebanon, they're going to go back and control the area from the Litani River south, both because of the resources that are there, agricultural resources, water resources that they need, but also because it's a good natural barrier. And so they've got their own agenda. Their agenda is not to build up Lebanon. Their agenda is to protect Israel and settlements.
All week we've been listening to speakers at the United Nations. If you were able to address the UN and you were able to convey a message, what would that message be, to the members there about Lebanon and what needs to be done? What would you tell them they should be doing?
First thing I would say is Lebanon's not going away. No, you may close your eyes or ignore what's going on, but the human cost of not paying attention to Lebanon is very high. Secondly, I'd call for a universal arms embargo. All countries, no weapons to anybody engaged in hostilities in Lebanon. And thirdly, of course, build on humanitarian assistance. But without those three things, situations are going to stay the same. The international community has got to draw its own red lines in the sand. Its own red lines to say, stop what's going on in Lebanon. Think about the Lebanese people, not yourselves for changing. But it's not going to happen. Hezbollah and Israel is certainly not going to change. And there's no moral equivalence. That's the other problem between what Israel does and what Hezbollah does. They both think they're protecting their own people, their own interests. Therefore, they're morally right. So when you have two moral rights arguing against each other, you're not going to have an easy resolution.
So they're both basically doing the same thing, the Israelis and Hezbollah. It's like two governments, and you're just the game board that they're executing their, conflict relation with.
Right. This would make a great, well, it will, it's already making a great case study for people who study conflict resolution. Because I think that people can argue that, for example, what do we do to pacify the border area and let the Israeli settlers come back to their settlements and let the Lebanese come back to their farms and their villages? I think rationally we can come up with solutions, but can we really come up with a way to get there? That's really the challenge. How do we call Israel and Hezbollah to step back, to stop the war talk, to stop seeing each other only as enemies and not as people who represent interests that are different than theirs? Now, the basic fault in that kind of scenario is Hezbollah believing that it's in its interest to eliminate Israel. That's a no-starter. That's a no-starter. And Israel believes that nobody loves it, and so they got to do whatever they can to defend themselves. That's a non-starter. So until they've changed those basic perceptions of who the enemy is and how they can defend themselves, this is not going to resolve itself.
I know that one of the big approaches has always been that, listen, if they resolve the Palestinian-Israeli issue, the region could be resolved. Do you think that that's a first step, or do you think that that's a mistake when it comes to Lebanon and Hezbollah and Israel?
It shows you what a quagmire the region is. I mean, you made a point that's really important, and that is Syria is so ignored by what's going on, yet they're still a major player in the region. We have to look at Syria, we have to look at Iraq, we have to understand the implications for Jordan. We're not very good in terms of a strategic view of the region. We're still dealing it with Band-Aid, 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 and not really trying to figure out what's good for the entire region and good for the individual countries.
Yeah, that's actually a new approach that I hadn't thought of. Instead of looking at a conflict flare-up between two countries, you have to look at the region where we have numerous conflict flare-ups over and over again in different spots. You're saying you got to really look at the region and change the region?
Change the calculus that people have. If they see on the horizon is more conflict, they're going to act out being against that conflict. But if there's any hope on the horizon, then they'll act out that way. We haven't given the people in Syria or most of the countries in that region a reason to hope that they'll be better tomorrow. So the appeal of Hezbollah and Iran and others is very positive to them. It's like Israel says, we've got to bludgeon Lebanon in order to protect the settlers in the north. Well, maybe the settlers in the north should withdraw and leave a more buffer zone on both sides, not just on the Lebanese side.
So it isn't just one side contributing to the problem. It's really both sides.
Both sides, because they have opposing views of what the future holds.
So if we were to summarize all this, the government needs to be stronger. Hezbollah needs to be put in place. It's not Lebanon's military. It's almost like they're using Lebanon as a base. And the Israelis need to stop punishing the Lebanese people for what uncontrolled militia is doing on its own in the south. It seems like the Israelis punish the Lebanese people for what Hezbollah does.
instant be the essential conflict between Israel and Iran. And until that conflict is settled, you're going to have another Gaza, you're going to have another Lebanon, you're going to have another whatever. But that's really the issue. How can U.S. and international policy change the calculus of leaders in Iran and Israel so that they don't see conflict as the way to resolve their issues?
All right. John Abinader, any final thoughts? I mean, something, I know it's like very hard to find something positive in this because every day the headlines get worse. The killing numbers increase. It seems like the rhetoric just ramps up and the emotion gets worse. I mean, is there any final thoughts about, what's happening and what people should know and do?
You really should think about it. Hezbollah has a legitimacy, not just a terrorist organization, but they represent people. They represent people who believe that they have legitimate concerns, as do the Israelis. So until there's some dialogue about these dueling narratives, without trying to find out who's right, just to find out where's the middle ground, we're going to continue to have this conflict.
All right, my guest, Jean Abinader, senior advisor at the American Task Force on Lebanon, talking about another tragic situation in the Middle East that we all hope, gets resolved, but unfortunately it's like a broken record that keeps playing over and over again, and it can be very depressing. John, listen, thank you so much for joining me on radio here in Detroit. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ray. Good to be with our people.
All right. We will be right back right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
With more than 30,000 successful in vitro fertilizations, IVF Michigan is now ranked as one of America's best fertility clinics according to Newsweek magazine. IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders in high-quality fertility care. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 9 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. A founding member, American board-certified Dr. Nicholas Shama, is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. He has performed over 20,000 successful IVF cases, and it's helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. When it's time to get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at one of America's best fertility clinics, call IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio toll-free at 855-952-9600. 855-952-9600. Life for Relief and Development has now been rated as one of the best charities for humanitarian aid. Life's humanitarian projects span the globe, and Life is celebrating its 30th anniversary of providing essential life-saving aid to people and communities in 36 countries, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. Where there is life, there is hope. And when disaster occurs here or around the world, including being one of the first responders to the Turkey-Syria earthquake crisis, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. We are looking to help the earthquake victims, and we take 0% overhead on emergency donations. So please help improve these efforts. Learn more about our involvement to help the helpless and bring hope where it's needed most, and make your tax-deductible donation to Life for Relief and Development now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's 248-424-7493.
Hey Michigan, let's think beyond the sink and learn where the water your family drinks every day comes from. Private wells and public water supplies allow homes across Michigan to draw water from different sources like lakes, rivers, and groundwater. Tap into the facts about your home's water source and learn about your home's water quality to protect your family's health. Visit michigan.gov/care for MI drinking water. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
And now I'm honored to be talking to Dr. Hamoud Salhi, who is a professor of political science at California State University, Dominguez Hills, in California, obviously. Dr. Salhi's academic research is in international politics and comparative politics, with the Middle East and Northern Africa as his area of study. Dr. Salhi, thank you so much for joining us on the Ray Hanania Radio Show.
Thank you for inviting me, and it is a pleasure and an honor at the same time.
So obviously we got so much going on in the Middle East. We got this carnage, genocide taking place in Gaza by Israel, and we have this war that's seems to be growing on the northern border of Israel with Lebanon and Hezbollah. Tell me, first of all, how you view the conflict between Israel and Lebanon.
And I think a conflict that is gone for too long, and especially because time and again we have not treated the Palestinian cause as we should. We seem to be entangled from time to time on a negotiation, what really it's negotiation about negotiation. We have a few agreements, but all agreements had some problems. That is on one hand. The second aspect of it is that you do have to realize, and we have to come to the realization that the situation cannot go like that, and that we have to define this problem. Is it an apartheid problem? And that would mean that Israel has to revise its laws. It has to adapt to the Palestinians' need, and we have to take that into account. We have perhaps take the South African model as an example. The second one is that we really have to think about two-state solution if we are there. And by two-state solution, we don't say, one full state for the Israelis and one minor or limited or not viable state for Palestine. Oslo had a big dream for the Palestinians. They thought they got a state, but they didn't, and we are still struggling. The third one, which is very, very important, it does seem, and it appears, that leaders matter in this conflict. Where we are today, a big reason for it is the lack of genuine interest in peace, but we are driven by self-agenda purposes. The Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, has clearly an agenda, and he's using this war for his self-interest. Historically, we had leaders who took steps to make this peace. Ishaq Rabin, his friendship with Arafat contributed to a step in the right direction. But leaving with Ishaq Rabin, leaving the scene, we had Netanyahu, we had Barak, all these leaders had a role in making peace, an opportunity to make peace, but they never do it. So the long and short answer for all of this, we have to think seriously about the occupation of Palestine and the need to recognize Palestinians as people with dignity, and we need to come to terms with what the world is, with what the world is saying, what the international courts are saying. All of those are realities that we need to address seriously if we were to bring peace to the region.
So it sounds like the conflict in Lebanon is really a spin-off of the bigger issue of Israel's oppression, Israel's government, I should say, their rejection of peace, their rejection of two states. It's almost as if they provoked this conflict even before October 7th, the way they treated Palestinians.
We could go back to early days. I mean, remember that the Ehud Barak withdrew from Lebanon after 11 years, but that was followed by another war. Lebanon this day is looked at from the perspective of Iran. We are looking at the Americans, the Israelis are looking at it as if an area, or Hezbollah is an ally with Iran, and Hezbollah has not rejected that. And the Lebanese problem for them, going after Hezbollah and weakens the Iranians. Sadly enough, the Iranians also saying the same thing. The Iranians use Hezbollah and other allies in the region for strategic depth. So the issue of Lebanon is part of the bigger picture, part of the grand design that Israel has. We could talk about the Golan, we could talk about what's happening today even in Yemen. So those are really complex issues, but it is also, as we've seen so far, connected to the big problem of the existence of an entity like Israel, who sees its security through strength, military buildup, and occupation within the context of their bigger picture, which is to occupy other countries for the purpose of achieving the right agenda.
Do you think it's fair to say that we would not have these conflicts if Israel had, one, a better approach to the Arab world, a fairer government, and a stronger government which is truly democratic, as opposed to the Netanyahu government, which is probably the most right-wing we've ever seen in 75 years?
On the one hand, Ray, you could say yes and you could say no. But what we've seen, there are points in Israeli politics that we need to factor. There is a generational change. There is a demographic change. You know, up to the 70s and even 80s, the early 80s, the discourse in the Israeli politics, we could build peace with the Arab with normalization. The Arabs said, no, we're not going to do it because, you know, there is this problem of Palestine that you need to resolve. The Israeli class, the Israeli leaders at the time, thought that in order to achieve peace, they have to be friends with the Arab. That's the ultimate goal. But then we had several factors. We had, on the one hand, leaders who have different ideologies, the growth of extremist rights, all of that. But we also have the collapse of the Soviet Union. Where the collapse of the Soviet Union is brought about 1 million or so, around that number, to Israel as part of the right of return. That changes the whole dynamics of the Israeli population. We shifted from this idea that Arabs are good friends to, no, they are enemies, we need to look ourselves. And you see that you have a bit of hopeful signs with the Madrid conference under the leadership of the United States. The Oslo Agreement, with a lot of people accepted with a grain of salt. I mean, it's the Palestinian decision, but we all understood at the time that this is not the right path. But then came 1996. The assassination of Rabin, the coming to power of Netanyahu. And Netanyahu in 1997 in Doha, remember we created that Middle East and Northern Africa Association, which was designed to go along with the peace process with the Oslo. Oslo was based on the idea that we are going to agree on the principle, we are going to create confidence measures. When we know each other better, then the big solutions, the big problems will be solved. That's including Jerusalem, right of return. Netanyahu came in, and what Netanyahu did, this is, you know, he was very clear about this. To him, we are not going to be, Israel will not be at peace by, to him, giving up peacefully to Palestinian rights. You are going to be at peace through strength. So we shifted negotiation from this idea of land for peace to land for security. The second thing that under MENA, the perception was, it's the same sort of similar approach in South Africa, where the idea was, you know, the white population had money, had the vast majority of the population, the color had labor, so the combination of two will bring South Africa to a good thing. Under the MENA sort of idea, after 3 summits, Cairo, Amman, I believe, and then Egypt, and then Doha, the perception was, or the goal was, that let's build economic ties. And through those economic ties, people get to know each other, will achieve peace. When Netanyahu came in and said, no, I don't want to have relationships with the Arabs. And specifically, he said, because Arabs are awkward. I need to look to Europe. I need to establish a relationship with Europe. Why is this? It was very, very important to take into account. But there was another thing that was happening. The reality is that we shifted to the technology area. In late 90s, for every 6 people in Israel, they had 1 computer. In the Arab world, you could measure that by 1,000 or 2,000 for 1. So yeah, the Arab world was backward, but the ideology, the mentality, whether it's on purpose for economic interest and all of that, it was, you had a shift there. And then we had, the Taba agreement, the idea that, in 2000, right, Ehud Barak come into power, and Ehud Barak telling us, he's a friend of Ishaq Rabin. He used to visit him every morning. The first visit that Ehud Barak did at the time was to go to Egypt, not, when a prime minister is elected, the first visit they do is to Washington. Ehud Barak went to Egypt. So the idea is that we build this idea that Ehud Barak is the right man. But then Clinton came in, and we left with the blame that Palestinians always miss opportunity to miss. So the point is this, Ray, there are some changes in the democracy of Israel that are sort of forcing the agenda on the political leadership. Now, couple that, we have a leadership that has no intent to build peace, or to view the Arab-Israeli conflict as a zero-sum game, as we say. Yeah. So those are really the challenges that we are at.
And you mean leadership? Are you talking about the U.S. leadership?
Oh, 100. The United States, time and again, have proven they can do anything to stop Israel, to establish a peace for the right reasons. And the United States has harmed the peace process in a lot of ways, because in Oslo it is supposed to be a mediator, a facilitator. Well, no, the Palestinians were negotiating against the United States as well, and that is sort of the challenge. And that brings us to the other factors that came into play as well.
So when we look at Lebanon too, how Lebanon apparently is part of this big conflict picture. And it also has some localized issues, the religious problem that it still, goes through, the weakness of the government, and the strength of Hezbollah, which I think has grown because of the weakness of the Arab world itself and the whole region. But how does Lebanon get itself out of this problem? Every time something goes wrong, they get dragged into a fight. They're not strong enough to stop it. They're pushed by outside forces. What does Lebanon need to do to become stronger, to take more control of what's happening?
It's a very, very, very important question. But what's very interesting is that Lebanon hasn't had a government for, I believe, if I'm not wrong, for about 2 years. The lira, the Lebanese currency, went, become nothing. But the population continued to live at peace. In other words, Lebanon has had a mechanism to deal with its own problems. And they are very, very smart in interpreting the Constitution the way they want it, to a point where, little things that if it says, they go through the loopholes. So they have managed to adapt, to maintain a certain kind of a system that doesn't destabilize the country. And the reason for it, when the civil war ended, people said a lot of things. But the reality is that the Lebanese came to they are tired of fighting each other. Now, You do have a confessional system that is based around religious division, and it's integrated in the whole structure. Like, for example, the Ministry of Electricity, as an example, or is controlled by Hezbollah, as an example. And then, Hezbollah uses that electricity for its own agenda, serving certain areas, not areas. But the system has been able to adapt. The biggest challenge for it is that you have an external power like Israel that justifies the presence of Hezbollah from the perspective that, look, Hezbollah was established to protect the south, a population full of Shias. And Israel also has its allies, the Phalangists, for example, in Lebanon. So the presence of Hezbollah is a very, very legitimate from the perspective of the Lebanese. Remember that Hezbollah is a legitimate from the Lebanese perspective. It is recognized. It's in the Lebanese government, despite the fact that the United States refuses to accept that. So eliminating Hezbollah, does it guarantee the safeguard of Lebanon or the stability? Hezbollah's reasoning, when it is asked to be disarmed, well, it's all disarmed. So you have also this idea of the failure of Lebanon, on the one hand, to take care of its own security through the establishment of a national army, of controlling the factions, of ensuring movement like Hezbollah doesn't get the power it has, and more than anything else, establish a relationship with outside countries that might hinder or affect the national interest from the perspective of the Lebanese. So those are really challenges that Lebanon has to go through, but the existence of Israel is a big factor in continuing the system the way it is at this point.
It sounds like Hezbollah is, if it wasn't there, Israel could just step in and take over Lebanon if they really wanted to. Is the United Nations or the United States doing enough to improve this situation there toward peace, or are they not doing enough to prevent the surge in violence that's slowly spreading from Gaza to Lebanon? And who knows where it can go? Syria's in turmoil. Iraq is in turmoil. Are they doing? Do you think the UN and US are doing enough?
The UN on one side, the two have to be treated separately. The UN, when you look at the resolution that passed by the General Assembly, even the resolution by the Security Council, I think within their capacities, they did what they have to do. But the UN is also some of its members. A resolution of the General Assembly are not binding, but the state could take action towards that. So the whole nature of international law has not worked in favor of the Palestinian or resolving peace in the Middle East. One could point it out that the main reason for it, or a cause for this failure, is the use of veto rights by the United States, and the United States' failure to even implement decisions that the Security Council adopt. A decision that the United States brought to the Security Council, the late resolution by withdrawal from Gaza, was led by the United States, or the ceasefire, but the United States turned around and said no.
So the UN actually could be a forum to help bring peace, but the United States has actually been an obstacle.
We could take the example of the fight of apartheid in the 80s, how the United Nations General Assembly passed resolutions after resolution, but then the states start to take steps on their own, imposing sanctions on the apartheid regime. Eventually, the United States came in and start to impose sanctions against South Africa. Late Senator Sullivan played a major role. We have the Sullivan bill in raising the consciousness. So the United General Assembly can achieve certain kind of success in that area, but the main obstacle at this point, and one can be hopeful with the fact that when we look at history, what happened in South Africa as an example, where the United States at one point found itself to change its rule. Go ahead, Ray.
I was going to say, do you anticipate any change as a result of the presidential election, regardless of whether Trump is elected or Harris is elected? is there any possibility that do you see indications in the politics in the U.S. that the U.S. might change and help bring about a peace, or simply sustain Israel's power?
Somewhere there, and I don't have any evidence to show that the United States always gives Israel the green light. Despite what we hear, the United States has its own red line of not to force Israel to do what it doesn't want to do. But somehow there is an implicit argument. We are going to give you until this elections is over, and then we are going to step in. I think Biden, because of his legacy, and he may not have sort of, especially if the Democrats win, he may not have to worry about being reelected. And Harris, we are 2 way from, we just started during that time, so she could get away with adopting or putting decisions that could favor the region. I'm saying this because United States strategically is being affected. Number one, can you afford continuing to sponsor this war? Put now your man in danger. You have the escalation. I mean, we talk about escalation in Lebanon, but what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in Yemen? The United States, up to this point, has been using the idea of, in order for me to gain leverage, to come back and have a strategic position against the Russian, the Chinese in the region, I have to agree with Israel, and Israel's role is to try to undermine or weaken Hamas, weaken Hezbollah. So at a certain point, this is costing too much. We are 11 months, and we're talking about maybe a year, 13 months after this. United States cannot sustain that. And more than anything else, Israel cannot sustain going this war. You have a population that is out. Now even in Tel Aviv, the entire Israel, for example, days ago was on alert. This caused a lot of problems for Israel, but more than anything else, United States is financing this war. It's providing armaments. I mean, we just heard about the $20 billion in arms that the United States is giving. Can the United States afford to do this? It can't. So the period we have, maybe in November to January 2nd, that's where things were happening. And there are reasons for it. Is that number one is it is costing too much. Second, we are going to be free from the elections results. We know it's over. Let's think about the strategic best interest in the United States. And the second one is, you cannot continue fighting for how long? And the third thing, the impact that this war has had in the Middle East. Today, the Middle East, when we watch Al Jazeera, when we watch the Arab press, you could see that people are very, very, very angry. They might be angry at Israel, yes, but angry more so on the United States, and particularly because of what we call the empty talk. I mean, you come and threaten the United States. You project the idea there are peace force, that there is an end to this, that there are peace negotiations, but nothing happened. In fact, to the contrary, every visit that Anthony Blinken made to the Middle East was followed by Israel committing some kind of genocide thing. So those are really what worries all the United States, and that's why I think a solution will be between after the elections and January 2nd.
So we could see some positive after the election. And a final question is, what happens if this conflict continues beyond the election and worsens rather than subsides? What's the potential for that region and for the U.S., for the Middle East? I mean, what do you foresee happening if it worsens?
I think it could worse. And one thing that we are not sort of taking into account, and the United States is not looking at it, is the reaction of the public, the Arab public. The Arab population. You could see a lot of Spain and the Middle East and the Gulf countries. The portray the war vary from one station to another. But when you travel there and you talk to people, there is a huge anger. The same thing we see it in a lot of countries. I think if it continues and we see it expanding, now we have the people might start coming down to the street. And that's where you have huge pressure on the United States, on the Arab regime, so the United States could potentially lose its allies in the region, the leaders that they're working with. And, as this whole package of normalization, all of that, that is dead. And by continuing without providing a solution, without showing that there is actually some kind of good that comes out of sitting this normalization. Of course, without the Palestinians, all of that is really none. But in the event of this continues and it escalates, the potential of having the Middle East erupting into a major protest is likely, more likely than not.
All right, my guest, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. It's a real pleasure. He's professor of political science at California State University, Dominguez Hills. Dr. Salhi, thank you so much for joining us on radio today.
Thank you for inviting me.
We will be right back right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
Hey, Michigan drivers. Are you sending or answering group chats behind the wheel? Checking emails at the light? Calling family or friends on the commute? Michigan's hands-free law makes it illegal to manually use electronic devices while behind the wheel of a vehicle. Breaking the law could mean fines or even community service. Go hands-free, just drive. It's the law. Learn more at michigan.gov/distracted driving. A message from the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
Thank you for listening to the Ray Hanania Radio Show, brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News, the leading English language newspaper in the Middle East at ArabNews.com. This season, the Ray Hanania Radio Show focuses on the U.S. presidential elections, the battle between the major party candidates, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, and the third party contenders who could push the election into the House, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Jill Stein. We'll be back next Thursday with more special guests to help us understand the role Arab and Muslim voters in America are playing in the presidential election. Check out our page at arabnews.com/Ray Radio Show for all of the programs that we've recorded and all of the story links that have been written about the program. And also you can go to my website at hanania.com, Hanania, hanania.com for my columns, my radio shows, my podcasts, and all my writing at Arab News. Have a great week, everybody. See you next Thursday. Good evening.